Going to continue reading, of course, in the Exodus reality. We're up to chapter 6, and tonight is going to be one of John Ward's chapters in the Hapu thread. And so that's where we're going to pick up where we left off tonight, or last night. And let's see, Lola, good to see you. Been chatting with a lass in Scotland about her livestock. Love the energy of the Celts. We sang, "You take the high road and I'll take the low road." She reminded me that it doesn't make a that it does make a difference. You know, I used to sing that song to my little kids at night. Not so much now. It's kind of funny. My first set of 3 kids are one way, and I raised them a different way. And this set of kids I've got, my wife is here now with my new set of 3, and the other ones are all grown up and out. And so we do things a little differently. Sometimes I sing, sometimes I read, sometimes they don't want any of that at all. So little different personality mindset. But I used to sing them Loch Lomond every night. And so that's, I'd play guitar and sing to them and stuff like that. So a wonderful song, Lola. And Becky, good to see you. Donna, great to see you. Fran, nice to see you. And I think we're lining up here. So I don't like to get started right away. I like to just talk a little bit of introduction to give people a chance to get in and see that they get that announcement. I hope you're getting pre-announcements. If you've clicked on the little bell by the subscribe button, that's supposed to announce, I think, 30 minutes ahead of time that I'm coming on air. Now, we're having some problems with that with the Situation Room with Rocky. The people aren't getting notifications. So hopefully you're getting notifications for this when I put something up and I put a reminder on it. It's supposed to send that out to you. Now, I was testing some, as some of you know, testing some software this afternoon. I'm not using that new software right now because I haven't worked out all the ins and outs of how to use it. And I've got that software so I can stop holding up the book to the camera to show you things I want you to see, so I can import things, so I can do more studio production here. So, Michelle, good to have you. Nice to see you here. And so tonight, we're going to pick up with chapter 6, and I'll give you just a brief summary of where we're going with this. This is John Ward's theory, the Hapu thread within the book itself. And as you know, mine's the Senenmut thread. And so John has a completely different approach to his theory. And his theory is all on Amenhotep, son of Hapu. And mine, which is about 80, 90 years, pardon for the little interruption, somebody opened the door, 80, 90 years after my theory of Senenmut. And John tends to be a minimalist when it comes to the biblical tale. And meaning he doesn't so much follow the story as you see it in Scripture, but thinks that it's more of an archetype. And that's the path that he's taking in this. Now, this is a very short chapter tonight, and it's called Victims of Circumstance. And if you don't mind my saying, hey, if somebody's outside there, would you reclose the door, please? Because I'm picking up all the sound from outside. Anybody? I see people moving. Somebody close the door, please. Hang on, folks. Nobody listens. I'll be right back. I'm going to go I'm not leaving the room. I just got to close this door back up. So, there we go. All right. Sorry about that. Like we say, scintillating live radio. If this were a radio show, I could use that line. So, scintillating live podcast, I guess it is. So, that's where we're going tonight. And John is following his thread of saying that he believes that the destruction of Lake Malkata drowned out the ancient city of Thebes on the West Bank. Now, I'm not going to take John to task on his theory. He's not here to defend his point, nor take me to task on mine. But this is his theory. And I do know that he has said that there is not physical archaeology proving that there was a city there, but it's assumed and it's just buried, and all these villages have grown up on top of the West Bank. At the same time, there's also the remains of the lake itself, which has cities growing up, or little, not really cities, they're towns. It's mud brick towns, villages that are growing up on the corners of this lake, and it's all fertile farming land down in the middle of that now. And you can still see the parameters of the lake from the air. And the old ancient palace of Amenhotep III is out there beyond the lake parameters, right on the fringe of the desert, the Sahara Desert, at the foot of the Theban Mountains. And so here we go. Ready to boldly go, says June. Good to see you. And so here we go. I'm just going to jump right into it, and we'll see where this chapter takes us. I'll do my best to do commentary on John's stuff, but mostly I'll be reading his. And if I see something where I say, hey, you know what? I can make some commentary on that, we'll do it. And I know I will. If you saw the graphic for tonight's show, that is a picture I took of a slab of stone that had the carvings of, if you look very close, it's got the carvings of people that are emaciated. And I took that picture at the little museum, I mean, a tiny museum, way off the beaten track, over by the stepped pyramid of Dozier, where last night I showed you a picture. It was a black and white picture, but the palm jungles, forests of near Saqqara. And we were at this little museum, and it said we weren't supposed to take pictures, and I took pictures anyway. And this was a picture of a slab that showed these emaciated people, famine or whatever. John thinks it relates to what happened in the aftermath of the destruction of Thebes, and which would have been about 400 miles to the south. So here we go. Let's dig in. Audrey, how you doing? Good to see you. I'm glad to have you here. All right, Victims of Circumstance is the name of this chapter. In the new light of day, one can only be, and you got to, by the way, you got to try to imagine John Ward in his British accent. If I read it that way, it would become tedious and stupid. So, but in the new light of the day, so if John Ward, imagine what the devastation must have been like. Now, keep in mind, this chapter is on the heels of his last chapter, which was, I think it was called The Destruction. It was when the lake, the disaster, when the lake caved and flooded the city. It would have been upon the remaining population. The river, having reclaimed its natural course and floodplains, washing away the debris and the remains of what was once Thebes, the sheer mountain of dead, missing, and dying would have been far too much for what little infrastructure remained within this ancient society. The temples and its priests were unable to offer help or assistance required due to their own desperation and inability to deal with such a catastrophe. This only added to the despair of the people that was once a thriving community with clear lines of demarcation and structure now lay in tatters and chaos. One could draw upon the contemporary experience, as many of us witnessing the devastating effects of a tsunami as it struck off the coast of Japan in 2011, the tsunami that hit Thailand in 2001, and the devastating hurricanes that annually hit landfall on America's East Coast. All of these natural catastrophes are being beamed around the planet instantaneously for millions to watch and respond to, with huge acts of generosity and kindness from the safety of our armchairs. As for ancient Thebes, she had only herself to fall back on. Keep in mind, there's nobody to help, and they don't have the infrastructure for this anyway. There were no international rescue crews dispatched to her aid. There was no United Nations relief, no mobile tents or other modern military those and provide the necessary shelter. For us, it's hard to imagine the consequences of not having such a well-equipped accident and emergency body like FEMA, the FEMA organization, can deal with such global crisis. For the Thebans, they had only themselves. The heat of the midday Egypt sun Egyptian sun in July usually goes well into the 100s. Combined with the lack of adequate shelter and supplies, those injured or suffering the effects of flood would have soon become victims of circumstance. And the unbearable heat would have helped add to the death toll. The frail and young would be among the first succumbing to its effects. Then, after a few short days, the waterborne diseases and pestilence would only add to the insurmountable problems that the survivors would have to deal with. Those who were injured would have succumbed to the unsanitary living conditions, increasing their chances of infections to their wounds and subsequently hampering any healing process, but ultimately bringing death. The tempest heat of Egypt is also a breeding ground for mosquitoes, flies, and other infection spreading insects, all of which would have multiplied in the aftermath, feeding upon those who lay decomposing in the sun and the individuals who had no shelter from their now uninhabitable environment. Malaria and other blood transported diseases rapidly spread amongst the survivors, hampering any rescue operations and other associated tasks of survival. Within a short while, the temple corridors would be teeming with those unable to deal with their illnesses. For sure, I paint a pretty gloomy picture. However, given the state of rudimentary housing and limited infrastructure available to the Theban population at that time, it's reasonable to suggest such horrific and depressing details. And this is John Ward's chapter, of course, so he's writing that. Now, I showed this picture once before. This is the one that I used in the graphic for tonight. Very hard to make out details. As you can see, I've got my new software, but I don't have it all up and working yet. But you see all the people down at the bottom, children trying to breastfeed things. So this was the stone that I took a picture of in that little museum. Oh, and by the way, anecdotally, I had my camera around my neck, and I would look around and I would lean the camera up against the glass and take a picture. Well, of course, one of the guards came out. They were watching the camera. John and I were the only ones in there. See, camera, show me. And I showed him what I just had taken a picture of, and he says, delete, delete. And so I was lucky I had other pictures in there. So I deleted one of like 10 pictures I took of this thing. And then he wanted me to scroll through. So I scrolled and here we go. I'm a thief. I'm a bad guy. I scrolled backwards and I hit pictures of my kids back home, and I kept scrolling. I go, that's all there is, man. And he says, don't take any more pictures. And I had several pictures from there. So maybe 15 to 20 pictures altogether. So yeah, I'm a scofflaw in Egypt, but he didn't know. So he didn't throw me to the floor. As for the dead, there would be no time for the obligatory 70 days of laying in a bath of natron or the customary mummification process to be granted to all who had died that day. The tombs took far too long to excavate, and the workshops that usually dealt with this matter were already full with the injured and dying. Either funeral, Bam, nice to see you, Bam Bird Lady. Let's see, anybody else wander in while I was reading? No. Either funeral pyres or mass graves would have been the only option available to the remaining Thebans. Given the option of committing the bodies to the Nile would have been aberrant to the survivors, and given the nature of their death and the devastation that had been inflicted upon them, this would not have been even considered. The desert floor would prove to be an ideal location, but the ground would have taken days to dig through, and with the rise to epidemics, other diseases, and incessant harassment from the local animal population, the funeral pyres would have been an effective way of disposing of the decomposing bodies. This next section is called Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage. John Ward says here, I would like to draw your attention at this point to the admonitions of an Egyptian sage, an ancient Egyptian papyrus that possibly dates to around the 18th or 19th dynasty, which we're in the 18th dynasty now, mid to the end of the 18th dynasty. And currently, there is only one original copy located in Leiden University, and it's known as Papyrus Leiden 344. It has unfortunately suffered considerable damage during its lifetime, which has left some significant gaping holes within its narrative, but also toward the characters to which it pertains. The original does not mention the name of the pharaoh or a date, and the final outcome of the story is also unknown due to missing verses. However, the content of the papyrus holds certain key elements that directly pertain to the unfolding events that I've suggested and include the aftermath of such a scenario. Also, there are clear associations with the contents of Spell 125 from Book of the Going Forth, or more commonly known as the Book of the Dead, which many have associations with the biblical Ten Commandments that were handed down to Moses by the writing of God on the Holy Mount. We'll deal with those texts later in the book. By the way, I'm going to look up this footnote here. I want to see what he says about spell 124. Was it spell 125? And it's footnote 4 in chapter 6. Let's see what he's got here. And by the way, he does list at the end. He's got something about the admonition of the Egyptian sage. Chapter 6, Alan. Okay, it's just Alan, Book of the Dead. All right, it's just a footnote for where he pulled that material. I thought he might have more information on it. So if I, said John continues, may draw your attention to Appendix A and the admonitions of an Egyptian sage, lines 46 and 47 speak of the Nile overflowing and the land becoming unusable and its fate unsure. Now, he did include the admonitions in Appendix A in the back of the book of admonitions of an Egyptian sage, and it's back here in the back of the book. And so he said in lines, what did he say, 46 and 47 of admonitions, it says this. Let's see, there's 40, there's 50, so it's right in here. Line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It says, and the servant pilfers whatever he finds. Here, let me read this whole section. But one who, this is an ancient writing that dates to the 18th or 19th dynasty, and they believe this, John believes this has to do with the destruction of Thebes. But one who is sly can become wealthy. Verily, every face goes white with fear. For archers are arrayed in order, evil is everywhere. And men are not what they used to be. Verily, thieves plunder everywhere, and the servant pilfers whatever he finds. Verily, the Nile overflows, but no one tills the earth on account of it. And all men say, we know not what will happen throughout the land. Verily, the women are barren and none conceive. Khnum does not shape men because of the condition of the land. So that's what John wanted us to read in admonitions. And it speaks of the Nile overflowing. It could be the inundation. It could be the breaking of the sacred lake, which was, of course, connected by canal to the Nile. Let's see. TT, nice to see you. Glad to have you here. If the embankments to the west that protected the agricultural fields during the flood season were in fact broken, as I've suggested, then the land would become unsuitable, and there would be a shortage of harvestable crop and sustainable food supplies for the cattle and other livestock throughout that season. Please remember that the banks of the River Nile to both Upper and Lower Egypt are extremely flat, and they are. And in most places lie beneath the flood levels. These embankments, especially on the boundaries of the cities, would have allowed the continued planting and tilling of the arable land, irrigated by the very successful and naturally fed canals, which also acted as routes of transportation, communication, and military applications. Water damage. Various archaeological projects throughout the years have carried out investigations to determine the exact location of these ancient canals and how they fed one another. but more importantly, how they would have been navigated during the flood season. In addition, further investigations were needed to explore the removal of the buildup of silt and accumulated rubbish, which would have been necessary to aid the continued use of them as a strategic waterway system, serving the entire city and its society. By the way, the buildup of silt, when I was at Silsila the last time, there was about 2 feet thick of what looked like just black ground right on the river bank before it went up into the little rocky crags, and you could see it eroding away from the water a little bit, and it would go down 2 feet, and it was just stratas of this flat black silt that had hardened, and it crumbles away and it resilts in the next inundation, and so on. And when John and I were digging, um, I'll maybe show you a picture of this one of these days. A few years ago, no, it was there almost 4 years ago, and we were doing a little digging, and we were breathing in that Nile silt, thousands of years of Nile silt built up once you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And we were clearing away entrances to some of the shrines, and atop the shrines were some quarries, and so we kept clearing the way, and our faces were just black, looked like we were coal miners. So that silt is still there, obviously, and Thebes relied. Wait, I'm too far up. Let's see. I'm on the water damage paragraph. In addition, further investigations were needed to explore the removal of the buildup of silt and accumulated rubbish, which would have been necessary to aid the continued use of them as a strategic waterway system serving the entire city and its society. Without these canals, the east and west banks would be cut off from one another during the flood season, effectively reducing the capacity to rule and govern the populace. Thebes relied heavily on these canals for the reasons I've presented, and they would have been invaluable during the crisis, helping with the transportation of supplies and ferrying the injured and dead to and from their respective areas. And given the devastation inflicted upon the fleet of cargo ships and other small boats moored at the harbors of Thebes, the canals would have been navigated by much smaller vessels, nothing more than rafts, really, but capable of completing the tasks at hand. Again, I refer, says John, to the admonitions, this time lines 54 to 65, which refer to the river as a place of entombment, and that blood is everywhere. I, of course, relate this to the immediate aftermath of the events where pools of blood began to gather and the rivers increased in height, washing the floating bodies northward away from Thebes. Look at the similarities between lines 54 through 65, the biblical narrative of the first plague. Here's the admonitions of the Egyptian sage. Now remember the first plague. What was the first plague that Moses brought down on Egypt and Pharaoh? Wasn't it the changing of water to blood? Lines 54 through 65 of Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage say, "Verily the heart is horrified, for affliction pervades the land, blood is everywhere. There is no end of death, and the death shroud summons, though one's time is not yet come. Verily, countless corpses are entombed in the river, the waters are a tomb, and the place of embalming is the river. Verily, the nobles are in lamentation, while the paupers are in glee. And every city says, let us drive out the mighty from our midst. Verily, the people are like ibises, for filth pervades the land, and there are none in all our time whose garments are white." Then Exodus 7:19 in the Old Testament says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, and over all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and vessels of stone." Is it coincidence, says John, that the ancient texts and biblical narrative talk of one and the same? The source of origin of the admonitions has been speculated for many years by various academics and educational institutions alike. Some suggest a reference to early dynastic problems within Egypt, and that the inclination of poetic narrative throughout the ensuing years has led to the final copy that we possess today, painting a more dramatic picture than that which was intended in the beginning. Whatever the origin, there are unmistakable correlations between the scenario of the apocalyptic disaster, the biblical narrative of Exodus, and other historical events that have taken place in Egypt's vast ancient history. What could Pharaoh or his political court of nobles have done to prevent such a disaster? Could they have prevented it? Could it have been avoided? These questions can never really be answered, but the effects of such an apocalyptic rage and its subsequent aftermath can be. Given the size and popularity of Thebes during the 18th dynasty, it is fair to speculate that the population was as diverse as it was in number. Such a terrible set of circumstances would have brought many of the survivors together within specific groups, but most likely the royal house would have remained singled out among them because of its high-ranking position within the overall community. Would Pharaoh be the vent of the people's anger as they looked to him as the personification of God on earth, the very same God that was supposed to save them from such terrible evils and prevent chaos from raining down upon them? Given the amount of protection Pharaoh would have had at any given moment, I doubt that the remnants of the hardcore commoners rallied as an angry mob against him or his family. Rather, a political or religious banishment may have occurred in such a series of events. However, this does not rule out the possibility that the small skirmishes were directed at the royal house. Now, this is the ancient workers' city that was washed away and its heart was hollowed out. Now, if you go to Menedat Habu, which is just to the, it's kind of to the north of Lake Malkata, you'll see this little town. And you can see it's just a laid out town, and there's tombs in the background in the hills. We walked here from, not from Hatshepsut's temple, but from the Valley of the Nobles over there in Thebes. And so this is a city, and when they excavated this, there wasn't a single thing there. Not anything, not even so much as a bead or a needle was found anywhere. It was wiped absolutely clean. And John's theory, of course, is that this was the workers' city. That was, and because the palace is not far from here, that was absolutely wiped out when the walls of Malkata came down. So, next section is when class gets washed away. Let's see. The ancient Egyptian society was not exactly a complex structure. Rather, the class system was very much adhered to, each man and woman knowing their place within the community and their responsibilities to the overall religious foundation that oversaw the smooth running of the state. By the way, in reading all of this stuff, and in John writing this and me writing some of the things I did, we're trying to give you all a picture of what life was like in Egypt back then when these events took place. And of course, John and I have different times that we think our events took place and different stories, different personages. But you're still looking at 18th dynasty separated by, as I said, about 80 to 90 years from each other, our two versions of what we think happened. And what's interesting to me is getting our heads out of the storybook version of this biblical story. The things we learned in Sunday school, the things we see in the movies, and so on. And it's getting into sinking our heads into what daily life was like, what was going on there. Do this because I can't show you this because my software is not quite set up yet. If you saw the movie Exodus, Gods and Kings, there was some CGI done of the city, which is supposed to be up around Memphis. I believe they never call it Memphis, but it's supposed to be up in the north because you see the pyramids from the river and things like that. And so, if you get a chance, go over to Google and Google the Exodus Gods and Kings movie and look for the city, the CGI, the flyover of the city. It's very, very cool. And it gives you, I think, a really unique picture. It's an artist's rendition, of course, in CGI, but I think this gives you a really good idea of what the city would have looked like at the time in the day. If you don't want to go do a search, go over to my website, scottallenroberts.com, click on articles. And when you get there, scroll down to the article, Exodus, Gods and Kings, I think I call it, or Looking Pretty but Dumb as a Rock. If you click on that, I've got a picture of that city in the article when it comes up. So take a look at that. If I was, of course, all set up here, I'd be showing it to you on my own screen. So it's a fun look at what the city most probably looked like at the time. Now, that's Memphis, where I placed the Exodus, up in the north in the Delta. And John's, of course, is 400 miles south down in Thebes. So we're different cities, but you still get the idea. Let's see. Their children followed in, he's talking about the palace life and so on. It wasn't a complex system. Their children followed in the footsteps of their fathers, entering their respective trades and professions. It was this class system that would have played an important role in the initial days after the disaster. Groups of well-defined class structure, religious beliefs, and skill sets would have begun to emerge within the depressed community, each having their respective leaders. These groups may have been responsible for the historical events that I suggest might have followed this catastrophe, which we'll explore later. As the days passed and the dead and dying would become one as the underworld surfaced within Thebes, as the last of their personal reserves dwindled away, people would begin searching for other supplies, unable to feed themselves or the injured who had survived the disaster. Eventually, due to personal responsibilities, the fit would be unable to offer support or medical assistance to those who were wounded, and the sick would eventually join those who lost their lives in the initial wave of destruction. Law and order would have broken down. Vigilante groups would soon form, protecting what little reserves of supplies they had left. Marauding gangs of thieves and looters would take over the land, stealing and pillaging what they could find among the remains. It would be fair to say that the neighboring cities would have offered assistance to Thebes. The established trade routes would have made easy pickings for those who hid and ambushed the support and aid that filtered along its dusty paths. The Medjay army and the judicial court system would be unable to cope with the increased criminal activity, forcing the law enforcement bodies to carry out lethal punishment to those found breaking the law. Line 42 of the admonitions speaks of the archers being ordered and that evil has spread everywhere. Now, this picture here is the empty granaries that stand behind the colossal ruins of the Ramesseum in Luxor, and we went and walked through those. This is all really right across the road from Hatshepsut's temple, from John Carter's house, from all these other temples. It's just right there. Everything's right there, and these were the granaries. Now, this is quite a bit down north, so yeah, downstream from the city of Thebes that would have existed on the West Bank. I don't know if John is suggesting that all of this was wiped out. I don't think so. He's just saying this is where they went. This is a good few miles down the road, as it were, from Lake Melkata. So the priests would have been an easy target with their granary stores and other associated food stockpiles, even though both Ipset Reset, Luxor, and Ipet Isut, Karnak, had been decimated by the flood. There would have been areas unaffected by the waters. The towering, massive stone buildings would have supported the community after the crisis, A hierarchy would have developed within the sacred walls, and people would have sought them out for shelter. Another option would have been the tombs secreted in the Theban mountains, offering a respite from the harsh rays of Ra. But in the Theban mountains, I'm sorry, but in the but most importantly, they were secure and could be defended in times of need. You know, what's interesting, we kept going a little bit north of Hatshepsut's temple. We were walking through some of the quarries at Hatshepsut's quarry and going back a few miles, and there were people just don't go. And up in the rocky hills above, you could see structures that they had carved out or built into caves where they made bricks or stacked stones and actually had family structures up there. It's very interesting to look at and explore. It's not a tourist site. There's nobody there because you're way out in the wilds of the desert. And I know we walked along the desert floor and I saw this huge pile of pottery. And by pile, I mean it's going up the side of a cliff in kind of a pyramidic shape up the side of the hill into the cliffs. And what that was thousands of years of people having dwelt up there, and they break a clay pot, they throw it over the edge. If they're done with the clay pot, throw it over the edge. And so if you started sifting through literally waist deep piles of pottery, spreading out hundreds of feet and going up hundreds of feet, you dig down into that spoil heap and you're going to find things dating back into the dynastic period. And there are some people that go out there and they'll live up in those caves and in those dwellings. Even today, you'll get some people who will go up there and do that. And you'll still find broken pottery. It's everywhere. So it's very interesting stuff. Let's see, who's taking off? Donna? Um, Getting tired, 10:30 p.m. out there, and it's 72, way past my bedtime. Good night, everyone. Good night, Donna. Good to have you here. All right. As the days passed, the dead and dying would become one as the underworld. I've already read that. I'm sorry. I'm back over on this page. I draw upon, John says, but again, I draw upon historical comparable material where history shows us that people will do almost anything to safeguard their families and provide the basic form of necessities to aid their survival. In the times of need, mass migration in any given direction in search of shelter and food is usually the result of a breakdown within the society in which they usually reside. These migrations only add to the turmoil and place extreme stresses upon neighboring communities and their own resources. Unable to cope with the amount of people, these smaller districts ultimately end up joining the migration in search for further food and sustainable resources. Livestock that survived would be scrambling for the little vegetation that endured the waters. Although the diminished livestock would now be limited to the higher grounds that skirted the desert's edge, foraging for what little it could find, it too would become susceptible to the contaminated water supply, bringing about certain bovine diseases that could be transmitted from beast to man. Blowflies, ticks, mange, the other ailments that afflicted livestock would be heightened by their situation, compounded and worsened to the extreme. Flies and mosquitoes would transport chronic gastrointestinal illness and blood-borne disease that would rapidly spread among those foraging for the meager pickings. Soon Thebes would become an open-air cemetery, the land of the dead in more than just words and metaphor. Of course, the most important commodity, water, would be the hardest to come by. The amount of pollution in the pools and waterways that ran through the remains of Thebes would have been so badly contaminated that it would have been deadly to drink due to the microscopic evils that would wreak havoc once ingested and most certainly bring death upon its drinkers. We must pause for a moment and ask ourselves how the royal palace kept its occupants hydrated during such a time. One could suggest that the waters upriver were clean and free of the debris and aftermath that contaminated the waters below. It might also be plausible that an ongoing supply of fresh drinking water was ferried into Thebes via the river by smaller vessels and by land across the higher desert ground. As we've discussed, the breakdown in the class structure would have led to immeasurable chaos running through what was left. But what about the aristocratic families and their inability, through upbringing, to cope with such a calamity? Having lived such a pampered life, surrounded by servants and serfs alike, it's difficult to ascertain whether they would have survived the first couple of weeks, having to fend for themselves. Their splendid villas perched high up in the desert plain, off the desert plain, with their ornamental gardens, planted orchards, and central ponds, would have been one of the first vestiges of those who sought shelter and security. Their homes overrun with commoners, I find it hard to accept that they would have opened their doors freely and willingly. I would suggest that most would have sought the safety of the royal palace and that of the Medjay. However, even the royal palace could not retain the sufficient supplies and provisions to sustain such a large amount of people behind its closed and reinforced doors. Again, we can read certain verses within admonitions that pertain directly to this predicament, in which it states that the nobles who once slept in beds now slept upon the floor, and those who had no beds now slept within the mansions. An ironic rags to riches tale, to say the least. Though the first couple of weeks after the catastrophe would have formed specific groups, which probably facilitated the overall survival of their members, Thebes still fell quickly into lawlessness and chaos. Further into the book, I discuss the emergence of the four main groups, which I believe are the basis for the biblical Exodus story. All right. Now, that is the end of chapter 6. That was John Ward's Hapu thread. Now, the next chapter is, what time is it? 9:44. It's fairly long. This is my chapter on the Senenmut thread. And I'm thinking 161. It's 30 pages long. So this is a good hour and a half read doing it this way. So let's see, what do we got going on here? I'm going to look in the chat room. We could call it quits for tonight and make this a short read, and we'll hit the next chapter is chapter 7, Senenmut. Some of this stuff you've heard from me before because we talked about Senenmut and a lot of this history in reading of both the rise and fall of the Nephilim and the secret history of the reptilians. But let me see what you guys are talking about. Let's see. Rocky Stucci. Rocky's in the room. I didn't even see you come in, brother. Tonight we talk about breast MILF. Does that say MILF? And enemas. Breast MILF and enemas? What the hell is on your mind, brother? I thought we were talking about politics tonight. We'll find out in about, what time is it now? 9:45, 10 o'clock. We don't go on until 11 here locally, so we're looking at still an hour and 15 minutes before Rocky and I come on. Yes, maybe we'll talk about breast milk and MILFs, as that says. Let's see. That is political, says Rocky. Breast milk. Yeah, there is, when you think about it, there is a lot of political negotiations and things like that. They focus around some of those things. Let's see. It's going to be a healthy show. As am I, Gemma. Sing for us, Celtic bro. You talking to me? Lola? Fran says, oh, here we go. Breast milk. Not sure on those topics, says Sue. Suze, I will tell you this. You know that if Rocky and I are talking about it, it's safe. We are safe. We'll protect you. when you're in there and we're talking about things. So Lola Joy says yes. I don't sing in Gaelic. I do sing Celtic songs though. So, um, and yeah, we could maybe do that one of these days. He says, rolling his eyes. No offense, Lola, but I sing in snippets these days. So, but you were. I'm just scrolling back to see if there's anything else. Scotty reads good. So says Bird Lady. That's what I say. Uh, I like to read because it makes me speak real good. Let's see. Not getting the feed. It's buffering, says Jeannie. Sorry, Jeannie. You seem to have periodic problems with that. It might be your connection doesn't always want to pick this up. TT can hear perfectly. I'm just going backwards a little bit. Let's go back and see if there's anything vital that we have to hit on. And the reminder came out fine. That's good. Robin Macadang Dang. You said that the reminder came out fine. That's good. I hope it came out in enough time ahead of time. Let's see. June says, finally found it. Oh, though I can't do it with my right hand. I can do it with my left just fine. Look at this. Look at the difference here. I can go like this, and that's about all I can do. But over here, I got that. See? I can do this hand is tough. Maybe it's stiff because it's my drawing hand. Let's see. Did you get redirected to an Iranian website? Seriously? Are you serious, Lola? Did you get redirected to an Iranian website? Let's see. Audrey came in. Scotty's still married. I am indeed. I've been married to my lovely wife, Rainey, for now. It'll be 12 years. We've been together for a little over 14 years. And this year will be our 12th year. And we've got 3 little kids. Let's see. Very happily married. Cool. Some days are cooler than other days, you know. Some days you got to pursue it. Other days it's on your lap. So, Rock, you know what I'm talking about. Nice to meet you here again. TT, I'm a history fan as well as a relic, says Suze. Let's see. History in the nostrils, indeed. I wish I could show you the pictures right now, and I can't because I'm not on my software, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Let's see. I'm old, over 50-ish. Hey, I'm old, over 50-ish too. Just about 60-ish. Let's see. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy enough. Cool. Life is cool. I love life. That's the thing. I'm like Rocky. I love my life. There are things that frustrate me, things I complain about, some things I whine about, but I like life. And I think, my mantra is the old Mark Twain quote, 20 years from now, you'll regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did do. So cast away from the safe harbor. Set your sails to the trade winds. Explore, dream, discover. That's my mantra in life. And, when you have kids, it's a little tougher to do. When you're married, you just take your spouse along and you go on adventures. You do stuff. Yeah, money can be preventative, but there's ways around that too. There's ways to get places. Do you know to go to Egypt? I've been to Egypt several times. I'm trying to get Rocky to go with me, hopefully in the fall if all goes well. But do you know that going to Egypt isn't all that expensive on the grand scheme of things, comparatively speaking? People think, oh, it's going to cost me thousands of dollars to go to Egypt. Well, it all depends on what you spend your money on once you're there. But the last time I went to Egypt, it was, I think I got a flight for, I want to say around $700 to Cairo. Then it was about $100 to $150 to fly from Cairo to down to Luxor. And of course, I went and stayed with my friend John, but I also stayed in a hotel down there. And when we're talking hotels, we're talking like in the mud brick, old, think of your little villages, and it's on the dirt road there. And it was a beautiful hotel, little run by local. The food was excellent. and it's not super expensive. I think the last time I went to Egypt, I was there for a month, and I maybe spent, because of the hotel and stuff, maybe spent $400 total. Maybe less than that, 200, because I spent most of the time on the boat with John and Maria, living on the Dahabea. And they covered me in their archaeological budget, so my food and stuff. But you eat locally, and you do all right. So Egypt's not all that expensive, and I only bring that up to say you've got time and money and all of that to do the things you want to do. And what is vital is remembering that, like that quote says from Mark Twain, 20 years from now, you don't want to look back and say, God, I wish I'd have done that thing 20 years ago. And now I don't. Now I can't, or now it's harder than ever. So you know what? You gotta do. And Rocky wants to tickle the cannolis nose. So is that what that was? So food. So yeah, get the bucket list out. So you can do it. Uh, you save your pennies. You could go to Egypt for $1,000. Just saying. And there's things to do there, and so on. So Rocky, we got to get him moving to get him to go to Egypt. You got to get your passport. You should do that now, Rocky. Even if you don't use it, even if you don't go, you'll have your passport. It's not expensive. Submit a photo, and you go in and fill out your forms, and you pay for it, and that's pretty much it. So let's see. All right, I think I've pretty much scrolled through everything. So I appreciate you all being here. And Lola asked, so I'll just give you just a little taste. If you are my kids, which are out there right now, and Rainey's trying to get them all to bed. They should have been to bed an hour ago. I'd sing them to sleep. I used to do that. And she said, Lola asked for a Celtic song. So since it's just you guys and me, I used to sing Loch Lomond, and I have no voice right now for singing. And it's better when you have accompaniment on a guitar. But I would sing on yon bonny banks and on yon bonny braes, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond. Me and my true love were ever one to gae on the bonny, bonny banks o' Loch Lomond. 'Twas there that we parted in yon shady glen, on the steep sweet side of Ben Lomond, where in purple hue the Highland hills we view, and the moon coming out and the gloamin'. Oh, you tak the high road, and I'll tak the low road, and I'll be in Scotland afar ye. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. The wee birdies sing and the wildflowers spring, while the sun on the waters is sleeping. But the broken-hearted kens nae second spring again, and the wae-fools cease from their gravin'. Oh, you tak the high road, and I'll tak the low road, and I'll be in Scotland afar ye. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. All right, folks. Thanks for being here. Hopefully tomorrow I'll have my good software set up, and I'll be able to show you some pictures and diagrams and maps as we go reading this thing. Tomorrow night is going to be the Senenmut thread, and the chapter is chapter 7, and the chapter is about Senenmut. And now I don't know if I read this when I just did a separate standalone thing on Senenmut. That was an article I read. I think it might have been an excerpt from this chapter, but that's what we'll do tomorrow. So thanks for being here. I'll see you tomorrow. And actually, I'll see you later tonight on the Situation Room with Rocky. Go visit my website, scottallenroberts.com. See my stuff over there. Go ahead and go over to my Etsy page and see the shirts we've got. Pick up a shirt. I've got a shirt on Senenmut and the reading for that over there. So you can go over there and see this stuff. And thanks for being here again. Talk to you soon. And there, Audrey put it up right there. Thank you, everybody, for being here. See you here tomorrow night if I don't see you over on Rocky's show tonight. Now, tomorrow night could be a little different, too. I'm supposed to do Consequential Rapscallions, I Do Declare, with Jeffrey Doughty. We've missed the last few Thursday nights for circumstance. And so hopefully we'll be on tomorrow night. If we do, that's at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, which could preempt my doing a chapter tomorrow night, which would move us into Friday for the next chapter. If we don't, for any reason, do Rapscallions tomorrow night, we'll jump into the next chapter. So again, thanks. See you later. Stick around another hour. Beyond with Rocky. Good night.